What was the biggest bullet you dodged? In 1992 I was 16. A bunch of us were about to leave a party and I called shotgun. But my friend Pat kind of wrestled me out of the spot and I wound up jumping in another car. Since the first car was now full, the other driver and I watched as our friend's car skidded into oncoming traffic. Pat was airlifted to the local trauma hospital where his dad told a huge group of us teenagers that Pat had succumbed to his injuries. Maybe that's not exactly bullet dodged, but edit. I guess this is what people mean by a comment blowing up. Pat's driver and my driver were racing each other. The road had just been paved and the shoulder was loose gravel. So when Pat's driver applied their brakes when the passenger side of the car was over the line on the right side of the hash to lean, the passenger tires kept spinning while the driver's side locked up, spinning the car into an oncoming pickup. The oncoming driver was hospitalized and recovered. Pat's driver broke a femur, was convicted of vehicular manslaughter, sentenced to home detention, but was late to get home from high school one day which tripped the ankle monitor and the driver did 30 days. The 3 kids in the back had to be extracted by the jaws of life, broke some bones, got an insurance settlement. However, I don't think I would have died if I got shotgun. We would have left 15 seconds earlier and we wouldn't have hit that oncoming pickup. Or maybe we would have. Well, about 15 years ago I dated a guy for less than a year. It was an awful abusive relationship, and I was happy to get out of it. When I did about 8 to 9 years ago, I saw him on the news. He strangled his girlfriend to death. He then dismembered her and lived with her body for a month or so before he was caught. Edit. Wow. Thank you for all of the awards. I've actually written about this before on AskReddit under a "Have you dated a serial killer?" question. Here was my answer, which gives a bit more detail on it. Not a serial killer, but I dated a killer. He was not a killer at the time. We were young and met on a dating website. He went to my high school, but graduated a few years before me. The first month was okay. Then he changed. We had a huge fight one time because he said something silly. I don't even remember what it was, but I playfully threw a pillow at him. He immediately flipped out, punched a hole in my door, and told me he'd make it so I would never have anything to come back to. Another time, he finally got a job. Didn't have one when I met him, and I was paying for everything. After job searching for months, he got one. It's his first few days at his new job, and all of a sudden he doesn't want to go in. No reason, he just doesn't feel like it. I tell him he better get to that damn job or he's going to lose it. After a lot of arguing, he gets ready, and we both get in the car so I can drive him to work. As I'm driving, it gets more heated, and he starts strangling me while I'm at a red light. The red light was right next to a gas station, and I pull in there while his hands are around my throat. I manage to get him off me, and I get out of the car and scream, "What the shit? I'm sorry. I blacked out. You just pissed me off so much. I told you I didn't want to go to work." The relationship lasted less than a year. He cheated on me with some girl, and for the first and only time in my life, I was glad someone was cheating on me. You can go live with her and be someone else's problem now. Then years later, when I saw him on the news, I felt really bad for that thought. He had handcuffed his then girlfriend, who had just had his baby, to the bed and strangled her to death. He thought she had cheated on him. He then dismembered her body and lived with it for a month in their apartment. Eventually, the smell tipped some people off, along with his girlfriend not being seen by family in a bit. The baby was okay though, and was taken in by the girl's family. He went on the run, but was later caught, and is currently in prison. No news article though. I have posted a news article with it before and got banned. Hopefully with all the info I gave you, plus someone guessed the state below, you can find it for yourself, so I don't get banned again for posting personal information by posting a public news article. Lol. Not my story, but a girl I knew had had a few drinks and decided to hitchhike home, a town about 40 minutes away from the one she'd been drinking in. Note it is very common for people to hitchhike in this area. She gets picked up by a car of guys. All seems fine until she points out they can drop her off just up ahead, and they keep driving. She had that instant sober feeling. She plays it off like she's clueless and totally down to keep hanging out with them, acting like she's very drunk. Meanwhile they're back in more forested area of the highway. Then she fake dry heaves and says she about to puke, really putting on a show, so they stop to let her out. She books it into the bushes and just doesn't look back until she's safe. Edit. Oh my gosh you guys, not even my story stop giving me awards. To answer some common things in comments, from what I'm aware of no charges were ever pressed. By the time she made it to safety they would have been long gone, and she had no info like names, license plate or anything. Yes, smart idea once in that situation. Definitely not smart to be in that situation in the first place, though. Edit 2. I just remembered another, not mine, but equals my mom. As a late teen/early 20s, I was with a group of friends out drinking one night, and one girl wanted to hitchhike, the others didn't. She gets picked up, never to be seen again, not even her body found. Don't drink and hike, hitch people. I was walking down the street in downtown Chicago, and I heard a loud bang followed by a woman screaming. Somebody dropped a full 2-liter bottle of soda from the 13th floor and it just missed me. It was essentially a giant bullet at that height and speed. The woman screaming was about 5 feet behind me. She was the second closest to being hit. I'm pretty sure that bottle would have killed me if it hit me. Edit. Thanks for the awards. I immediately reported this to a nearby police officer, and he said they were trying to find the guy who was trying to hit people from the 13th floor earlier that day. That's where I got the 13th floor. For those of you who say there's no such thing as a 13th floor in America, fine, 14th floor, but on the same height as where the 13th floor would be. For non-Americans, 13 is unlucky, so some buildings will call their 13th floor the 14th floor. Another edit. Lots of discussion on why Americans sometimes skip the 13th floor, and why Asians sometimes skip the 4th floor. I've been to a hotel in Asia that skipped both. 4th floor for the superstitious local Asians and 13th floor for the superstitious traveling Americans/Westerners, so the actual 4th floor is called the 5th floor. The actual 13th floor is called the 15th floor. The actual 20th floor is called the 22nd floor, etc. About 10 years ago, I was in a relationship with someone, and she became pregnant. We were only a few months in, and I was terrified. But I did the right thing, stuck with her, did my best to help her through her pregnancy, turned my whole life upside down, sold my house to move to the other end of the city, where her daughter went to school. She was divorced, had a kid with her ex-husband. Everything was going great, until she became pregnant. We were having a lot of fun, and enjoyed each other's company very much. The instant she became pregnant, it was like a switch had been flipped. She became a straight up psycho. It wasn't just hormones from pregnancy, this was a whole other level. She was psychologically and verbally abusive. She took being unreasonable and belligerent to a whole new level. I asked what she wanted for dinner one night, and she responded with, "You should know what I want for dinner. You're supposed to just make it." And it turned into an hours-long fight over how the hell I'm supposed to know what she wants for dinner. Apparently I wasn't in tune with her enough to know, and that was an unforgivable error. This is one of hundreds of little things she did to make me feel like a piece of shit. She never missed her chance to take a shot at me, miss my turn while driving somewhere, and have to turn around. I'm the most embarrassing boyfriend she's ever had, and she can't believe she even allows me to drive anymore. She'd like that, all day, every day. It was demoralizing, and I was broken for years because of her abuse. Anyway, we move into the new house, and within a month, she leaves me. So all this shit I did to turn my life upside down. I sold a house and bought a new one, which costs a lot of money in real estate fees/moving fees, and it was a more expensive home. Worse than that, I now had to deal with this cheating psycho for the next 18 years because she was carrying my baby. On top of all this, she had been cheating on me and was with her ex-boyfriend now. That's who she was moving in with. But I was going to be a dad, which was cool I guess. Wished it was under different circumstances, but not having to see her every day was going to be nice. About a week before she gave birth, I ask if it's okay if I'm there when the child is born. She says I really need other guy to be there. I'm okay with that if he is. I gotta tell you something. There's a chance it's not your baby, and after fighting with her for 3 months, to get the baby's blood type. It was inconclusive whose baby it was. So we went to the DNA test, which she fought against me about, finally caving after I laid out in text everything she had done to me. And now she was leaving this question of whether or not I have a child unanswered. Point, it wasn't my baby. Bullet dodged. This was an enormous relief. Having to deal with her for 18 years while we co-raised a child would have been a nightmare. I had witnessed how she handled literally every communication with her ex-husband, not the same guy she cheated on me with and moved in with. She was a cheating cunt to him. It didn't matter what it was about. She always found a way to start a fight. Hubs, my sister, and I were hanging out around my parents' house on a very boring 4th of July. We decided to wash my husband's new car sitting in the driveway because it was hot out, and an excuse to play in the hose. Point, we were literally walking out the front door and I said, hey, we should eat lunch before we get all wet and stuff, and everyone agreed. So we turned around and went back inside. I was warming up something in the microwave, a hot pocket I think, and all of a sudden I hear the loudest bang I think I've ever heard from the direction of the front door. Hubs and I look at each other wide-eyed and run outside. Point, I was greeted by the back end of a Crown Vic, smoking something fierce, plowed into the tree in the middle of our yard. For a split second I was just stunned, then screamed to my sister inside to call 911. I looked over to the driveway at the car we had been planning to wash just 5 minutes ago. Point, totaled. Completely totaled. Brand new 2011 G6, destroyed. Guy hit it so hard it did a complete 90-degree turn across the driveway. He actually hit it so hard, it ended up ricocheting and hitting the other cars in the driveway, mauling 2 other cars. Yard was sheeted. Crown Vic was sheeted. Tree was sheeted. Point, we immediately assumed it was drunk driving. Being the 4th and all, I went over to the driver's side and found a very old man, very bewildered, unable to comprehend what I was saying but conscious. I will never forget the look he gave me, confused, helpless, scared. I was on the line with the paramedics as they sent over the ambulances and tried my best to follow their instructions. My sister was only 14 at the time, so I handled the call. Turns out dude was diabetic and had passed out behind the wheel due to low blood sugar, hit the gas pedal with his weight as he passed out, and was plowing down our residential street at about 65 miles per hour. He jumped the curb, drove down the sidewalk past another house, then slammed into my husband's car, and subsequently, the tree. Point, if we had been anywhere near that yard/driveway, I have no doubt one or all of us would have been seriously injured or dead. It was sheer dumb luck and timing that saved us. Huge bullet dodged, or should I say, huge car dodged. My high school sweetheart and fiance was my bullet. Point, he ghosted me out of nowhere, no explanation, just gone. So needless to say, no wedding. I sent the ring back to his mom cause I didn't want it and was pissed. I go on to live a great life, find a wonderful guy, and we have been happily married for 21 years. 25 years later I find out that my old flame had been arrested for underage solicitation, sexting underage girls, possession of child born, and many charges of sex with minors. Apparently Mr. Big Man in his community was arrested in a sting operation after this 12-year-old girl's parents found a whole series of explicit texts and had found that he set up a romantic hotel room get-together for them. Police pretended to be her, and he was caught in the parking lot of the hotel. Even better, he was married to the same chick he was apparently seeing while we were together, and had a couple of kids, all around the same age of his victims. Yeah, before finding all this out, I regretted for a long time that we didn't work. After finding out this had been going on for at least 20 years, I was rather glad I got ghosted. Never been so glad to dodge a bullet. Edit. Thank you for the awards, but if you can, please donate to local child abuse centers or battered women and children's shelters. They need help, especially this year. Edit 2. Apparently I wasn't clear in the sequence of events. He was arrested 5 years ago, and the texting/sexting were part of the charges against him at that time. I have heard rumors from various people that he was active in the chat rooms back in the day, so he may have very well been involved with underage people that way as well, but I have no proof of that, only rumors. Edit. Thanks to this thread a new sub has been born. Please share your experiences r/porn narcissist literal bullet dodge story. Point in my 20s I was really into claybad/sheet shooting. I discovered an old ammo reloader from the 50s in my parents' basement. Father let me have it. He used to use it in his youth as well. So I started reloading the shells myself. Shooting a few times a week, it was worthwhile to reload them for the savings. The problem however is that the reloader was worn out and wasn't putting the proper proportions into the shell sometimes. I wouldn't know this from lack of experience and not able to see the bar that fills up the powder into the shell. This bit is important to understand what's going to fail and how. How reloader works is, put the powder in first, a plastic wad to keep the powder sealed in place, then the BBs, ammo, on top and the shell folds into itself. Doing this by hand would take a very long time. A reloader automates this process. All you have to do is put the physical shell in there, pull a hand crank, and out comes the completed reloaded shell ready for action. Anyway, went to the range with 2 friends. We were having a blast, no pun intended, using this ammo. Up until this point we hadn't used a bad round yet. Friend tossed up a bird, I took a shot, and it sounded weak, barely any kick to the gun. What I should have done is stop right there and check things out. Instead I took another shot quickly so not to lose score. The results are as follows. When I took the first shot the plastic wad went 3/4 up the barrel. The shell didn't have enough powder in it. When I took the next shot the BBS hit the plastic wad and the barrel flowered outward like a cartoon. I felt a BB rub my sideburns. That's how close the blowback was. The box behind me was peppered with BBs. Somehow by pure luck none of us were hurt. I spent over $300 buying a new barrel for that gun as it was a 25th anniversary Bloodwood edition shotgun with changing choke tubes. It was my father's. I wasn't going to return it like that. None of mine had choke tubes attached. Are pictures of the aftermath. This happened in 2003. I have never shot a gun that uses gunpowder again. I made the switch to PCP air rifles. Ordering overseas as that wasn't and still isn't really a thing. This is a weird one, but the family that adopted me probably helped me dodge a huge bullet. I was born to a poor teenager and she just happened to go to a particular solo adoption agent who just happened to know my adoptive parents personally. My parents were only in the state for such a short amount of time, military fam, that it's wild they're the ones who managed to adopt me. They also were the mom's second choice at first, as other families were trying to get me. From what I understand, it is a miracle that I ended up with the parents I have now. Anyway, they're the best family I could ask for. Seriously, they're saints. Supportive and kind and hardworking people. My mom is my best friend. My sister is on the spectrum and taught me more about accepting myself than anyone else ever could. My dad and I didn't have a perfect relationship, but he taught me some much needed lessons about adulthood that I probably wouldn't have understood so wholly without him. I often think about what kinds of families I could have ended up with, maybe a wealthier one, but I got them instead. They're all a bunch of loving weirdos and I grew up with so many friends who had abusive parents, parents who hated each other, siblings who were downright cruel, etc. They never made a show of me, like lots of adoptive parents do, and they've always supported my far-fetched ideas. They were just this amazing blend of structured and chill. For example, I loved farming and horses as a kid, so my parents homeschooled me and allowed me to spend every other week at our family friend's farm, helping take care of the horses and just having fun doing farm stuff, while making sure that I was always on top of school. Also, I was born with some health issues. My mom was a nurse and my dad a medic, so they took amazing care of me. They've also always respected my extreme introversion and shyness when other people have tried to push me to pretend to be something I'm not. My brothers and sisters were much older than me, so they were able to look out for me when I was a dumb teenager while relating with me and showing me a lot of empathy. Another cool thing my parents have said that they love having a young kid at an older age, as they are old enough to be my grandparents. I've introduced them to things they would never have known about otherwise and dragged them along to places and trips and events that they ended up liking a lot. One time, my dad drove me for 5 hours and let me skip school to see my favorite band on their last tour. The show was at a bar and we had an incredible time, and my dad was hit on by tons of gay dudes all night. He was very flattered, and it was so fun. We also toured some local gastropubs that day, and it reignited my dad's passion for farm-to-table cooking. If we didn't have each other, we both would have missed out on so much. We all just complete each other. I feel like I really was born to be in this family. Finally, they are black, and I'm half black. We live in an area that's like 99% white, and I was teased quite a bit as a kid, but they always had my back. They gave me a lot of perspective, as my mom literally grew up under Jim Crow laws. They taught me to be kind when it's hard to be, and to defend myself when no one else will. I'm so lucky. Sorry for the hypothetical bullet answer, but yeah. My ex-husband. He told me he wanted a divorce, but I didn't. He agreed to work on our relationship and give it a few months. We set a date and went to work, and he acted like things were changing and he wasn't going to leave. He started encouraging me to take out debt and spend money out of our savings, etc. Turns out that he was lying to me and had every intention of leaving on the date we set and crushing me emotionally so I'd hate him forever, and was encouraging me to take out debt since it was all in my name and he'd get half the savings. I only found out his little scheme because he gave me his Apple Watch that we'd just purchased while he was working on something, and I read his messages because I had a feeling something wasn't quite right. For those of you that don't know, if you delete a message on your phone, it doesn't automatically delete from your Apple Watch. I found a few hundred messages to his best friend and mom talking about how much better he could do than me. He had feelings for a coworker and knew she wanted him to. Spoiler alert, she didn't. She's just a nice lady. He hated me, and I was the worst decision he'd ever made. He never really had feelings for me anyway, etc. It was a bunch of savage cruel shit. Finding it rocked me to my core. I'd never imagined anyone could hate me like that, let alone someone I was married to. This happened like 2 weeks after he'd initially sat me down to talk. We were in public and I cried after finding the messages. I went up to him, held up his watch, and quietly told him I knew his plans and to find a different ride home. His smile dropped, and the color drained from his face so quick. I went straight home, and by the time he arrived, I'd packed him a bag of essentials, left it on the doorstep, and called both his mom and best friend to let them know he'd be needing a place to stay. He was crying, and we hashed it out on the steps, which wasn't my proudest moment. I won't lie though, to see him cry after what he had said about me was so satisfying. The next day, I had the locks changed. By the end of the day after that, I had all of his sheet packed and waiting neatly in the living room for him to pick up. By the end of that month, I had filed for divorce and we were officially and legally done forever. He's a cheating loser and I absolutely dodged a bullet. It's been a long road to rebuild my trust in people, though. I'm definitely better off having gone through the whole situation, and while looking back it was the best thing that could have happened. It absolutely sucked to go through. Years ago I lived in Vancouver and liked to go for long walks. Beautiful city to do so. I was heading to a friend's first to drop something off and then cut through a neighborhood with a lot of Southeast Asian immigrants. The ones I got to talk to were mostly from Vietnam. I was aware of a van behind me, but it was midday and there were people out, so it was only a passing thought. A lady was working in her garden, and as I approached her house she started to look behind me. Then she came out onto the sidewalk and started talking to me in her native language. I understood none of it, but her body language was agitated. She kept gesturing to me to come with her up their walkway. As I looked behind me, I see 3 men getting out of the van, which is now parked just behind me. By this point the woman has a good grip on my arm and has me dragged almost to her porch. She kept talking to me and pointing to stuff in her garden and I just listened, nodded, and kept a good eye on the men in van. I don't remember how long we were there, but the men finally left. Both myself and the woman let out huge sighs of relief. She then patted me on the arm, said something, and then went back to her gardening. I booted it to my friends. House. On the news the next day was the story of a woman who was kidnapped and gang rape. The victim was grabbed on the next street over from the woman's house, not long after my encounter with her, by 5 men in a van. The men were distinctive and the description of the men in van fit the ones I had seen. That woman saved me from something horrible, and I'm forever thankful. I'm way late to the game with this one, so this will likely remain buried. But here ya go up point. When I was 20 I was in Fallujah, Iraq. This was during some of the worst fighting / deadliest years of the war anyway. I was out on patrol with my squad. We were moving through one of the more dangerous parts of the city. Densely populated, lot of foot traffic, tallest buildings, narrowest alleys. I was farthest back on this patrol point. We made our way through an alleyway. Staggered but nearly single file, with 6 to 7 story apartment buildings towering over us on either side. Point an explosion. I remember the pressure in my ears. The taste of copper swelling in my throat. Dirt and debris showering over us as a cloud of dust enveloped the entire alleyway. Point shouting followed, and some quick movements, but I was fine, all things considered. Point the insurgent that set this IED used a 155mm illumination artillery round instead of a 155mm HE, high explosive. If it had been an HE round, I would have been turned to hamburger instantaneously. But instead, an illumination is basically just a big sheeting firework that lights up the sky at night and lets you see something like a 1 kilometer area. I'm often at odds with my mom. She is very self-absorbed and doesn't make sense when she rambles about nothing for a lot of the time she speaks. She gets it from her mom. They share some kind of cursed gift of gab with no upside. Point so, when she had a 3 AM chat with me at age 25 about my girlfriend of 3 years, and the relationship was pretty much going to be my one and only on to the end, I was very surprised when she suddenly started making some very solid points about how my girlfriend was basically an adult child and, rather than having a partner, I was basically raising a daughter. Sure enough, after that I saw my relationship a lot more clearly. Things went off the rails after that, and I made the decision to dump her. Then she'd got crazy. This girl stalked me at my job, left me letters both at my house and at work, texted and emailed me. It flip-flopped violently between threats to tell everyone embarrassing things about me to pleads to take her back. On a whim, she then joined the army and bragged to me about how she would become part of something greater than I ever could be. The communications petered out, but I remember the last text I got from her a few months later was that she was getting married that day to a guy she met in the army, and he was so much better than I could ever be. Point thanks mom. You adopted me, you supported me, and you bailed me out of the worst mistake I could have ever made. While in Iraq, my platoon got called up as a QRF, Quick Reaction Force, when one of the other platoons in my company got into some heavy shit. We didn't know it at the time, but they were getting cut to pieces during a planned night raid. Point you have to understand, QRF getting called up doesn't necessarily mean anything. It can just mean they expect resistance and need backup, or maybe they found something they didn't expect. Point. So I've had maybe 2 hours of sleep because we'd just gotten off patrol and we get called up. No biggie, get the guns and armor, pile into the vehicle, we are on site in maybe 20 minutes. There's a Mother-sheetin' racket going on when we get there, gunfire, explosions, all the good stuff. At this point, we find out why we got called up. The platoon we got called into backup got sheeted up by the numbers. 30 guys went in, nearly all of them got wounded. Turns out they got a really good tip about somebody making VBIEDs, and the entire house had been turned into a fortified fighting position. Anybody that knows anything about Mount knows taking a fortified fighting position is really expensive when it comes to casualties. And this got really expensive for us. One Kaya, like 25 wounded or something crazy like that. Point there's only one way to take a position like that when it's surrounded on all sides by civilian houses. Can't blow it up because you're in the middle of a city block. You've got to go in the front door and kick their teeth in. Point my place gives us the call that we are gonna breach the house again. The other platoon didn't know what they were walking into, so they were cautious and held their fire until they were engaged. By then it was too late. Point we know what's in there already, so we are just gonna go in guns blazing, kill everything in that house, and call it a night. Point we get out of the vehicles, get ready to stack up outside the door, frag grenades ready to go in. Point we get the call to stand down. We are like, what the shit? Why? Let's just do this shit. Turns out special forces wanted to take a crack at it themselves, along with a platoon of Iraqi army. They breach, and we hear them bringing the shit in ruckus. Then, boom. The dudes inside the house wired the entire thing to blow, so once they saw they were gonna lose, they opted out of life and took one of the SF guys and the entire platoon of IA with them. The aftermath was sheeted up. Blood in the streets, bodies everywhere, ukes are rolling around, just a complete sheet show. If all the explosives they'd wired up had actually detonated, it would have taken out that whole block, and I'd probably be dead, even if I hadn't gone into that death trap. I'm only here right now because SF wanted to harden up the platoon of IA they'd been training. I was 30 seconds away from getting a shiny medal and a gold star for my mom, along with most of my platoon points. Still makes me sick to this day. TLDR, almost got exploded. Didn't point eater. Here's an account of what happened to the platoon that got shot up before we got there. Thanks for the silver, yo, and now a gold. Thanks. Have your pets spayed and neutered. They probably don't need both. Check with your vet. I was a young dev team manager at a software company. One contract employee had been very sporadic in his hours, which was fine at first, but it started turning into now showing up at all and still logging hours. I tried reaching out to him repeatedly to ask if he was okay or whatever, but never got a response. Worked with his agency to have him removed. We boxed his belongings and the agency rep took them to his office. About a week later, I get a call from this guy. He's in the parking garage and his card key won't let him enter. I tell him I'm coming down to chat and head immediately down the elevator to the parking garage, where he is as I walk out the door and I hear the lock click behind me. It occurs to me that I'm about to tell this guy he's been fired. He's much bigger than me, and then the fear set in. I put on my best stay cool face and just talked to him as respectfully as I could. I explained that I had not seen him in days, nor had I been able to get a hold of him, so I had to terminate him. I told him that his agency rep had all his belongings from his office and that I would need his card key back so I could turn it into security. There was a short pause. He shrugged and apologized to me, gave me his card key, and we said goodbye. I'm lucky he was willing to take the honest approach and not get angry. Leaving/getting kicked out of my group of friends in high school that eventually became weeaboos. My best friend since elementary school became a manipulative asshole and backstabbed me our sophomore year. I knew our friendship was on the rocks since they kept excluding me and made fun of anything I was interested in that wasn't whatever anime was popular in the early 10s. The moment I knew I probably wasn't gonna stay friends with them was the last time we all were hanging out, and I was excited about getting my driver's license and trying to talk about cars. They all laughed at me for wanting to drive and went back to watching what I would later find out was Naruto Yaoi. Then my friend spread a rumor I was gay to try and increase his chances with a girl in our group. No one really believed it thankfully, but I had it and became a loner for the rest of high school. Good thing too, cause they leaned heavily into the weeaboo thing not long after, and I mean really into it. Dressing up stupid, singing anime songs, using broken Japanese, and acting like the people you read about online. Everyone thought they were weird, and after high school few of them have yet to move on and amount to anything. Definitely not on the same level as some here, but I dated my first girlfriend for 5 years, from 17 to 22. From very early on she always told me she was unhappy at home and wanted to move out. Anytime she would get into an argument with her family she would come to me and say okay, we need to move in together now. The longer I was with her the more and more it went from that to why haven't you found USA place. The more I suffer the more it's on you for delaying this. Meanwhile I was a teenager and then in my early 20s, working part-time and going through university and trying to explain that it wasn't feasible for us or affordable. It came to a head when her friend offered us a room in her student house and she just said we are taking it without asking me. This room was in a house with her friend and all her university sports teammates. It was in a town over an hour away by car, which I didn't own at the time, in one of the most expensive cities in the country to live. So I'd be a brand new university grad, have to quit my job, move into a single room of student housing with strangers with an extremely volatile partner. Away from my friends, family and whole life really. Basically I finally put my foot down and said no. She launched into a 4-day long abusive tirade which led to me finally ending the relationship. It was after I broke up with her that I realized how abusive she really was and everything I had endured. Not even a full year later I got my first full-time job, which, over 5 years later has led to 2 promotions and a comfortable living. Staying in this town led me to meet my current partner who I now live with. And can't imagine my life without. When I look at that one moment, one decision that is the most literal definition of choosing which path on the fork in the road to take. Making the decision to say, no, I'm not doing that. At that moment, is the closest I'll ever come to dodging literal bullets like Neo from the Matrix. When I was in college, I had a friend, Sally, who adopted a dog, hoping to get it approved as an ESA. When it wasn't, she scrambled to anyone she could to give the dog to until she came up with a new plan. She refused to give it back to the shelter, or to someone she didn't know. I told her I couldn't take the dog in, even though she offered to pay half the pet fee for my apartment. I recommended my friend, Cassie, and she took the dog in instead, and Sally said she'd routinely walk the dog, provide supplies, and pay half the $200 pet fee within the week. While looking for a permanent solution, she provided the supplies, but didn't hold up on the rest of the promise. For one, she kept promising to pay soon, but kept making excuses, because she was always strapped for cash. On top of that, she gave up searching for alternate housing for the dog a week after the deal was made, because I only want to give the dog to someone I know. She acted as if Cassie would be the permanent owner. Sally also got busy, and couldn't always walk the dog, so the dog would have to pee and poo all over Cassie's apartment, which she had to clean up. She had college classes, social commitments, her Air Force duties, and her own personal issues to deal with, and it was hard on her. But she still refused to give up, and even tried getting the dog approved as her ESA, but it never came through. The dog was a sweetheart and very loving, but it's still difficult to handle a dog on top of everything else. 2 weeks later, the apartment complex found the dog during an inspection, and immediately told Cassie that the dog had to go within the next day or she'd be fined. She's lucky she wasn't given anything worse. Sally got angry at Cassie, blaming her for the dog getting taken, and saying that she now had to find a solution immediately, because she didn't have one ready. Cassie was horrified, and felt so guilty about it. I often think how, if I had been in that position, I would have barely survived the first week. I've told this story before in another thread, possibly another account too. I have had a few over the years. An acquaintance of mine from my nightclubbing days invited me on a double date with her new boyfriend and his friend, who apparently had a thing for me. I was in my late teens. I wasn't interested at all, but she kept going on at me to join her, and I naively went along thinking it wouldn't be so bad, expecting us all to the pub or something similar. However, when we arrived at the flat, she and new boyfriend immediately went up to his bedroom, and she left me downstairs with his friend, who asked if I wanted to watch a film. I said yes. He asked what kind of films I liked, and I said horror films. So he pulled a film off the shelf and loaded it up, and it was about Ted Bundy, a notorious serial killer and necrophile. I wasn't comfortable with this, but was in a strange house in an unknown part of town. I thought my friend, who at this point was having noisy sex in the room above us, would come down anytime soon, and we'd go home. The film carries on and the guy's trying to make small talk with me, and during one scene where Ted is violently rapping a woman and screaming "She to beach," this guy does the sleazy fake yawn and put arms round unsuspecting person thing and says this is giving me a boner. That was the fastest I'd ever left any house ever. Shortly after I'd found a cab service and got back home, my friend rang me asking why I'd ditched her and left Ted, not his real name, without saying anything. And when I told her what happened, she told me he was harmless and a really nice guy, and I'd taken it the wrong way, and was probably frigid. I didn't speak to her again after that, and ghosted her. When she called the following week to see if I was going out that night, this was 20 odd years ago, I'd say given the climate of the time, and not having any trackable phone or anything like that, I'd dread to think what might have happened if I'd stuck around. I was offered a job by a friend of mine. His company was hiring and looking for people. He said his company was great. At the time I was working for an explosives company and had been for 4 years, so it was comfortable. It was ran like trash by trash people, but I loved my immediate coworkers. The day my friend asked me if I wanted the job, the managers had pissed me off something fierce, so it helped me make up my mind. I had my friend set up an interview. The pay was slightly less than what I was making, but in my gut I thought it was for the best point, so I did it. I switched jobs 5 years later. I'm still with my friend's company. I've thrived here. Even with the pay loss, when I first started it was a net gain. Because this company picks up 100% of your insurance premiums, and it's a top of the line platinum plan that is so good nobody I've talked to has had anything even close. That should tell you how this place treats their employees. Oh yeah, and now I make more than double what I did at the last place. I look back on that time when I could have turned down my friend's offer. Knowing myself, had I been in a different frame of mind that day I would have turned him down, which would have been the worst mistake of my life. Edit. To expand on this a little more, I still maintain contact with people from the previous company that I liked. Things got bad after I left. The one manager I really liked and was fair and rational was fired. The big boss guy who fired him was also fired for unknown reasons. The cool shipping manager was fired. The dick-headed other shipping manager was demoted and a bunch of people I liked left. I got one other guy from there a job at my current company when an opportunity presented itself, and we've become better friends. I offered one other person a job, but he turned me down. He had gotten a promotion recently and just had a kid and didn't want to instability of a new job. I understand and wish him the best. I got in contact with that manager I really liked and we caught up. He's at a much better job now and still a cool dude. This happened to me and my boyfriend just last weekend. We just moved into a pretty dangerous apartment in a sketchy part of town. Last Saturday we had been sipping on alcohol and decided to go for a walk to pick up more. I figured it was alright as it was only a few blocks away and I didn't want to drive. We got ready and loaded up with a pocket knife each and left. Everything was okay and we were enjoying our walk when he stopped me in my tracks and told me to take a different route as he seen two boys start walking towards us. It was like 11:30 p.m. He pulled out his knife and pushed me ahead and told me to start running. I did exactly as he told me to, cutting through parking lots and such. I was scared and crying when he told me we were being hunted. We ran until we hit the main street that was filled with cars, police and other people. I felt a bit better, but when we went into the store they ended up surrounding the doorway trying to intimidate us and a junkie who was outside panhandling. We got our alcohol and my boyfriend said that we should take a different route home, to which I pulled him back and demanded we buy a taxi instead. The junkie chimed in and told him it was much safer for that anyway as the other boys had been flashing some weapon at us. I had stuffed an extra $20 in my shoe just in case of any emergency. When our taxi pulled up we jumped in as fast as we could. As we drove away we seen the same two people who were following us take off running the same way we were going. Obviously we were quicker because of the vehicle. As we turned the corner we both noticed a huge group of like 13 people. I couldn't count every single one. That's when it hit me that we were about to be jumped. The taxi driver overheard our conversation and also seen the group, so he ended up driving us home for free. We definitely dodged a bullet that night. If I had listened to my boyfriend and walked back home we would have probably been badly beaten or even stabbed up. Who knows? I'm just happy we made it home safely.